All right, so now we're moving on to the next section, and this section is called Maycomb's Ways. In the first section of this module, you prepared to read To Kill a Mockingbird by reflecting on the tension between the individual and society in which our identities are formed. In this section, as you read chapters 1 through 7, you will connect your examination of the individual and society to characters and setting of the novel. Literary critic Wayne C. Booth writes that the plots of the great stories are built out of the characters' efforts to face moral choices. In tracing those efforts, we readers stretch our own capacities for thinking about how life should be lived. In order to understand the moral choices depicted in To Kill a Mockingbird, we must first look at both the identities of those making moral choices and the context in which they are made. In other words, we must start by examining character and setting. When Atticus in chapter 3 famously advises Scout that you never really understand a person until you consider things from his point of view, he might as well be offering us advice on understanding character in a work of fiction. As Michael W. Smith and Jeffrey D. Wilhelm assert, the unique power of literature allows us to pay respectful attention to people and perspectives that are different from us in time, place, and experience. In chapters 1 through 7 of To Kill a Mockingbird, readers will meet and establish first impressions of most of the important characters in the novel, including Scout, Jem, Atticus, Calpurnia, Dill, and Boo Radley. Just pay respectful attention to these characters, both in the questions and the activities of Section 1, and throughout the rest of this module, is to go beyond their surface traits and to seek to understand as best we can how each thinks about the world around them. By doing so, we can better understand the choices they make in the book, and more deeply reflect on ourselves as moral actors in our own world. But character is not sufficient for fully understanding the choices made by Scout, Jem, Atticus, and the other residents of Maycomb. We must also put these choices into context. Go to the next page. By examining the circumstances in which they are made. When we examine these circumstances, we are examining the setting. Just as character includes more than surface traits, setting goes well beyond establishing the time and the place for a novel. To meaningfully understand the setting of To Kill a Mockingbird requires understanding the moral universe in which the story takes place. In other words, it requires having the sense of the rules, the constraints, the possibilities, potential conflicts, and possible consequences that affect the choices the characters make. Without this knowledge, we cannot adequately analyze, understand, or learn from the behavior of the characters. For instance, to understand the respect Atticus shows for the Cunninghams, and the disdain he exhibits for the Ewells, the reader needs to know not only the perspectives and experiences that the character of Atticus represents, but also something about what he calls Maycomb's ways, the effects of the Great Depression, and more. As Smith and Willem write, settings don't come from a vacuum. They grow and evolve from the compost of all that we know from the world, from history, from our own experience and that of humanity, and from our experience with other books and movies from that genre we are reading. We better understand this web of factors that makes up the setting, the better equipped we are to understand the possibilities, constraints, and rules, both explicit and implicit, that influence the choices that the characters make. In this section, you will begin to understand the moral universe of Maycomb, Alabama, both through analyzing the text itself and through investigating some of the historical context into which Harper Lee has placed her characters. By looking closely at what the characters say and do, as well as how they act towards each other, students will begin in this section to establish an understanding of Maycomb's ways. Sometimes the clues you need to build this understanding are stated explicitly in the text, and other times they are implied by the characters' words and actions. In Section 2, you will use this evidence to piece together the effects of class on the social hierarchy of the town, based on the way the characters they meet interact with one another. The race and gender will be examined in later sections. They will also consider the way that Scout's first-person narration both enriches our experience of the story and imposes limits on our ability to truly know some of the other characters and events she reports. Finally, through a series of activities using primary source documents and other historical resources, you will learn in this section about the Great Depression and its devastating effects on American society, especially in the rural and small towns south. By examining photographs and hearing first-hand accounts, you will confront the shame, humiliation, and vulnerability experienced by many Americans in the 1930s, and consider how these factors help you better understand both the characters in the novel and the moral universe they inhabit. Your first activity, once you've read the first chapter, is going to be to create identity charts. But I will put them all in order and how you have to do this, okay? I think I want you to do some of the history stuff first so that you can sort of have a setting where to place all of this as you're reading. So let's carry on reading. Create identity charts. Identity charts are a graphic tool that helps students consider the many factors that shape the identities of individuals and communities. As part of your examination of identity in the pre-reading section of this guide, which you've already done, you created identity charts for yourselves. Identity charts can also help students gather and analyze information about the identities of literary characters in order to help you better understand the dilemmas and choices you face throughout the story. Creating and modifying identity charts for central characters in To Kill a Mockingbird will also help prepare students for a culminating activity, which is going to be your final assessment, which asks you to analyze the moral and the ethical growth of a character from the novel. So you'll pick someone and you'll be analyzing their moral and their ethical growth. Keeping detailed identity charts while reading the novel will give you a head start in this task after completing your reading. I recommend you start identity charts for the three main characters of To Kill a Mockingbird, which are Scout, Jem, and Atticus, after you've read the first chapter. Write the name of the character in the center of the blank page in your journals. Remember, you set this up a few lessons ago. So then you can look through the text for evidence that helps you answer the question, who is this person? I encourage you to include quotations from the text, so write things out from the book that you think are important, as well as your own interpretations of the character or figure based on your reading. You will return to these identity charts throughout the novel to expand and revise them as your understanding of each character deepens. So you'll keep going back to them. They are going to be your tool to write your final assessment. So it's really important that you keep that up.